that the society, recording in progress, I'm getting a message, that the partnership that the society has with the library, thank you, Corin, and all the library staff for helping us for the, in this partnership to bring history alive in Humboldt County. I'd like to mention that our next presentation will be on Saturday, September 11. We usually meet on the first Saturday, but because of the holiday, we're meeting on September 11th, at which time Tom Hart will talk about apple production in Humboldt with an emphasis on the work of Albert Eddard. So that should really be fun, something we can sink our teeth into. Now, recently, I do want to mention what's going on at the society right now. Recently, when it looked like the COVID cases were stabilizing and we were coming out of the woods on that, we reopened our doors for research, and people came pouring in, and at Barnum House. But as we all know, that effort didn't last very long because COVID cases are surging to astronomical numbers, in my opinion, in the county right now. And so in order to protect our staff at the society, we're closing the doors again until further notice. But that doesn't mean that your research opportunities are shut down. Far from it. You can go online and search for all manner of digitized material, or you can talk to an archivist who will help you with your search. And you can find out about our hours and the opportunities on our website at info@humboldthistory.org. That's humboldthistory.org. You can get all of our information, and do become a member. It's through efforts like we're making today with the library and other partners in Humboldt County that help to maintain and to bring history alive. Today, the person who will bring history alive is Jim Garrison, who grew up here, went to school here, and now teaches here. In 2014, Jim received his BA in history from HSU, and shortly afterwards became the collections archivist for the Humboldt County Historical Society. And he served there until just this last May. So that's quite a tenure, the 7 years of service that we really appreciate. Can I say that we miss him? Yes. Visitors to Barnum House, where the Society's archives are stored, were often impressed by his consummate knowledge of the archives and of Humboldt County, and not to mention his great sense of humor and rapport and his outreach to the community. So what else? He's also the author of Images of America, Scotia, and Rio Dell, and now teaches at Redway Elementary School. And one final thing, he wanted me to say that he's passionate about the study, preservation, and celebration of our history. And that says it all for all of us, that the Humboldt County Historical Society. And please welcome Jim Garrison.
Thank you, Renee. I appreciate that awesome introduction. It'll be hard to live up to it, though. I really feel that we can celebrate our history here in Humboldt County, because the more you scratch, the more you find around here. We have such a deep history, and we're so connected to so many other events nationwide and worldwide that it's easy to fall in love with our past around here. But as Renee said, my name is Jim Garrison. I'm a fourth grade teacher here in Redway, and I spent the last 7 years as the collections archivist for the Historical Society, so I'm pretty familiar with their collection. When I was first approached to do this research, it was for the 100th anniversary of Armistice Day. The Rotary Club of Eureka was putting on a big thing, a big celebration at the Adorney Center, and they were looking for a keynote speaker. So they approached Jeremiah Scott. rest in peace. Jerry was a friend of mine, and Jerry immediately came to the Historical Society thinking, well, if I'm going to do this, I need to find out what I'm going to talk about. And we together looked and discovered that very little was really available to put together something easily on this presentation. So Jerry threw me directly under the bus and said, why don't you do it, Jim? So I did. And I was actually pretty excited to get a chance to do this. Particularly at first, I didn't really know the whole scope of what presenting at the Adorning Center was like. And so I thought to myself, oh, World War I know the society, you know, we don't have a whole bunch of pictures in the county that are directly relevant to World War I, but we do have at the society this fantastic collection of World War I propaganda posters, right? Liberty Bond posters and things to support the war drive. And they're beautiful. They're like they're brand new. And it's one of my favorite parts of the collection. And I've been dying for years to have an excuse to show it off anyway. So I thought, oh, World War I, this is going to be great. And I got a hold of the folks at the Rotary, and they said, oh no, there's no visuals. We don't have any way to project that or anywhere to do that. So it's just going to be a speech. So I was a little bit crestfallen, but I found such wonderful stuff. I was able to pull it off as just a speech, but I'm super happy that today, when we revisit this again, I'm going to get to show you guys those posters from the Historical Society's collection. I think you're going to love them. And I've also pulled together some things from newspapers and from other sources and what few pictures we do have that are relevant to this topic. This is a big subject and it really covers a lot of ground. So I'm not going to cover all of that ground, but I'm going to show off some of what was going on in and around the county during World War I. So let's see if I can share my screen here. See if I'm tech savvy enough to make this work. Bear with me. I can see a little bit of that. And then hopefully you guys can see. Hopefully you can see that. I'm not too in your way with me. Okay. Oops. So without further ado, you know, looking at the subject of World War I and looking at how little stuff we have to put together a really great pictorial thing for PowerPoint on here. It's once you start digging into this and you look at other events worldwide and whatever, it kind of seems like there were so many other big events that followed World War I directly on its heels. Prohibition, the Great Depression, World War II, the Cold War, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. World War I sort of feels like it was a war that happened a million miles away, and it took a bit to dig up a good amount of stuff here. But before World War I began, we were chugging along just like any other West Coast lumber district. Local prohibition was happening in some parts of the county, years even before federal prohibition and the passing of the Volstead Act. However, there were 58 bars still in Eureka, just Eureka, when the war started. So apparently not everyone was a teetotaler in the county. Like most places all across America, people were working, taking care of their families, and wondering what the president might do about the war raging across Europe and whether it was going to impact us. Here's a lumber camp. Here's something that people were doing at this time period, working out in the woods, working in sawmills, or maybe they were working at dairies. This is the dairy in Lolita. There was another dairy built in Arcata, both of them right in this same time period, just before the war. Here it is there. People were also, how were they getting around? They were getting around maybe by train. In 1914, the NWP connected the county to the rest of the world by rail, making us the last community, the last county in the United States to have such a connection. So people were pretty excited when they drew back when they drew back the redwood curtain and pounded in their golden spike softly at Cane Rock here. By the time the war started, of course, cars were more than here to stay. They'd been here for some time. This is a 1916 Cadillac and a 1916 Page. Most of us probably never heard of a Page, but here they are in Humboldt County.
Jim, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We're getting some comments in the chat that folks are seeing some grayed out boxes over your images. I think it might be little dialogue boxes in Zoom that you have open.
How do I fix that?
If you have like the chat box open, if you go ahead and minimize that, it should hide it. Or participant box.
Okay, let me see if I could do that here. Hide them. Is that going to take care of it there?
If you could drag it to the side of the screen, I think that would make it a more clear view for folks.
Let's see here. Hide video panel. Hide floating meeting controls. There we go. That should hopefully help.
Now there's just one right in the middle, a little skinny one.
Okay, did it go away?
Yep, now we're good. Sorry about that.
Good, no problem. I want people to be able to see this. So as I was saying, in the 19 teens, of course, we had cars all over the automobile or all over the county. Automobiles were getting more and more popular and people were getting around via that way more than anything else, really. But sometimes they had to fall back to older ways to get around because we didn't have bridges all over the county. So here's a car, 3 of them actually. Who wants to be the guy on the back? Not me. Okay, where were we here? Let's see if I can make my clicker work again here. There we go. Another thing that was happening in the 19 teens was the Sweet Pea Festival. And this was a big deal back then. This is the Bank of Eureka's float, the Bank of Humboldt, I guess. One or the other anyway, maybe both in Eureka. 1917. Here's a carnival that happened in 1915, right around this time. This is the Barnes Carnival. This picture's often been billed as the Buffalo Bill Circus, but it's actually the Barnes Animal Circus. There's some blank things I can't seem to get rid of in the PowerPoint. Another thing that's popular, of course, is the theater. People are doing the theater at this time, big time. There's theaters all over Eureka. There's the Empire Theater, and people are enjoying both silent films and vaudeville and live entertainment stuff. Also, some people here in Humboldt County and around the nation were against going to war. And many voters around the country and our county elected socialist candidates to office because of their anti-war stances, including Elijah Falk, mayor of Eureka in 1915. Kind of like the Vietnam conflict, many, many years later, there was a sharp outcry from a lot of people, a lot of parts of society against the young, poor, working class young people being killed in war for what they called capitalist profits. Labor unions and the industrial workers of the world were implicated in spreading anti-war messages and often came under fire for it in the press. They were labeled as traitors and portrayed as allying themselves with Germany. Despite objections, many people supported US involvement, and many took steps to involve themselves even before Uncle Sam followed them over the top. Over the top here. I can't seem to get there we go. So around the world, of course, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand on June 28th, 1914 propels Europe into war. The European powers divide into 2 coalitions, the Triple Entente, consisting of France, Russia, and Britain, and the Triple Alliance, consisting of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. In the years immediately preceding our entry into the First World War, we had a very small army, and mostly we were only engaged in conflicts on the Mexican border with revolutionaries under Pancho Villa. We had a local who was down there, Thomas Monroe, was serving. He was a West Point graduate, and he was a lieutenant serving in in that particular little border skirmish. The only military organization that we had here in Humboldt at the time was the 5th Division of the Naval Militia, being commanded by Lieutenant A.B. Adams. To be honest, our nation was not prepared for war in Europe, and it took a little bit of time for us to gear up for that. When mail was received in Eureka for some U.S. naval submarines, the H-1, H-2, and H-3, it started a rumor that Humboldt Bay was going to be a submarine base, which would have been pretty cool, I guess. But that didn't work out so good when one of the submarines got a little close to the beach at Samoa. And the Navy got a reminder of how dangerous the Humboldt Bar and the surrounding area is. So this was December of 1916, and the H-3 went aground on the North Spit right there by Samoa. People in Humboldt County by this point were pretty familiar actually with shipwrecks and ships going aground and et cetera. 10 years earlier, the Corona had gone aground. Just the year before this, the Bear had gone aground at the mouth of Bear River. So it was a thing, but this was really close, much like the Corona. It was right outside Eureka, and people could go see it and crawl all over it, and it was a real spectacle for them. And of course, this was followed at the beginning of 1917 with the grounding and loss of the cruiser Milwaukee while attempting to retrieve the submarine. This all brought home to Humboldt County residents the inevitability of our involvement in war, I think, and it gave them kind of a very in-your-face reminder of our connection to the conflict. The H-3 was eventually rescued by Mercer Fraser. They built tracks right over the dunes and jacked that thing up and hauled it out of here. This is all a story in itself, so I'm not going to get too mired down in it, but really fantastic. There's a wonderful horde of pictures involving this event. The Milwaukee, sadly, it wasn't able to be dropped back into the bay like the H-3. It was left. Basically, the Navy built a pier out to it, salvaged everything they could, and then sort of left it to the people to dismantle, which they did over the next few decades. Also, I think must be the Navy. Somebody blew up part of it during World War II, probably to keep it from being so visible at sea. But that was excitement, right? The U.S. Army Recruiting Office opened in Eureka in November of 1916 and had signed up 160 volunteers before we had even declared war. On April 6, 1917, the United States declared war on Germany, and the people of Humboldt County shifted into high gear to support this effort. The United States, by the end of April, 204 Humboldt County men had signed on. A mass meeting was held in the Occidental Pavilion after we declared war in Eureka there, and there were fiery speeches by leading citizens, and the culmination was a resolution of support for President Wilson and the war. This is only a little bit ironic because Wilson was elected on a promise of keeping the United States out of the war. However, in a great show of patriotism, the Ladies Auxiliary of the Grand Army of the Republic petitioned Eureka store owners to fly American flags to show their support. And before you knew it, the entire town was bristling with flags, and the price of flags went through the roof. Was what I'm told, a lot like after 9/11, right? The 5th Naval Militia was immediately activated, and on April 11th in 1917, after a reception and dinner in their honor, they were shipped out from the train depot in Eureka. They went to Mare Island Naval Shipyard and then were assigned to the USS San Diego before they were split up and assigned throughout the fleet. The Selective Service Act was passed and went into effect on May 18th, 1917. Humboldt County newspapers printed information about the Selective Service Act in English, Italian, and Portuguese here in Humboldt County. All males between the age of 21 and 31 were required to register with the local draft boards. The last day of registration was June 5th, 1917, and it was made a holiday. In Humboldt County, timber workers and many sawmill employees stayed at their jobs, and special registrars went to these workplaces to register them. Once registered, well, this is typical Army stuff, right? Once registered, men waited. Hurry up and wait, right? They waited to be called up for their physical examinations. They received notification through the mail, and their names were printed in the local newspaper. So they knew when their time to go was. Those who did not register were subject to arrest. Of the 3,702 Humboldt County men who registered, 1,270 of them also filed for exemptions. Many workers at Lolita dairy farms filed for exemptions, stating that leaving their jobs would be ruinous, not just to their livelihoods, but also to our county's dairy industry. Their petition for exemption was stymied, however, after the appellate board received a letter from the Club Women of Humboldt, which read in part, "We, the women and daughters of Humboldt County, do hereby pray that you do not consider the dairyman's plea for exemption. Humboldt County is flooded with women and girls who will gladly carry on the work that is required in the dairy business. We fully realize that our boys and young men must take an active part in this worldwide war and protect the purity of our women and our country." In all, many exemptions were filed, and most of them were denied. And those who were exempted were usually very heavily stigmatized by their neighbors and peers. Here's your dairy women. We'll take care of it, boys. Get out there and get in the trenches, right? The draft continued through the rest of the war, and it would be expanded to include men from the ages of 18 to 45. The total number of men from Humboldt County who served in the war was well over 3,000, but only 884 of them were draftees. The rest were all volunteers. Many people in Humboldt and across the nation, despite initially being against U.S. involvement, came to see it as a necessity. Many people saw it as patriotic duty to support the war and went to great lengths to do their part and to do what they thought was right. One of my favorite stories in all of this research, a man named Ole Hansen, 70 years old, Humboldt County pioneer, lumberman, and Civil War veteran. He felt so strongly about the war that he went AWOL from the old soldiers' home he was living in Santa Monica, and he made his way back to Humboldt County, riding the rails, thumbing rides, and walking all the way up here. And when he got to the recruiting office, they turned him away because he was too old. Poor Ole. All right. In many ways, Humboldt County pushed the envelope of patriotism. The Humboldt chapter of the Red Cross, in addition to raising over $157,000, they also specialized in knitting and sewing work. And women all over Humboldt County worked tirelessly, knitting and sewing items for boys on the front lines in the trenches. Many homemade socks, scarves, caps, and other items were sent to the men in France. But women weren't the only patriotic knitters in our county. Mr. W.L. Jarboe of Arcata, another Civil War veteran, took up the task of knitting for the Red Cross when his wife became ill and couldn't do it. He completed 24 pairs of socks for the soldiers on the front line, which to me, that's amazing, because I think it would have taken me the course of the war to knit one sock, and I probably wouldn't have finished that. Women in the US and here in Humboldt were, oops, back this up. They were asked, they did and were asked to do far more than just knit socks, though. In addition to milking or to stepping in to milk dairy cows, they also worked in sawmills and factories. And this happened not just here in Humboldt County, but around the world. These women are working at Pacific Lumber Company in Scotia at the factory during World War I. The Red Cross, in addition to raising a lot of money, they also played an important role during the flu epidemic that swept across the nation and the world and Humboldt County during this time. Humboldt was not spared the horrors of the flu, and the Red Cross leased the recently closed Northern California hospital to help care for the many sick people. The flu also wreaked havoc with the draft board in its efforts to induct healthy men for the war. By the time the flu hit Humboldt County in October of 1918, several Humboldt County recruits had already died from the flu away from home while answering the call. This is Clyde Hemphill of Blue Lake. He's really the first Humboldt County citizen to die of the Spanish flu. There's a lot of research that's been done about the flu in our county, and there are links to articles on the Humboldt County Historical Society website. So I'm not going to get too heavily into that either, but really great stuff. Great research has been done on that. I encourage you to look that up. Humboldt County took the flu very seriously. We adopted laws requiring residents to wear masks, and we forbid gatherings of more than a few people, and et cetera. But we were still sort of, and I think everyone in the country was a little bit, we were subject to hosting super spreader events then too. And too often, I think they looked like bond drives, sadly, and parades to support the war effort. Of course, they also looked like people going to the bar, I think, too. But in all, more Humboldt residents died of the flu, 216 people, here they are, than were killed in action in France. That was only 66 people. Fundraising efforts were undertaken locally to support the Red Cross and the war effort by a lot of local groups and clubs and fraternal organizations and outfits. The Elks Club, the local fire departments, the Scotia Fire Department, local schools, a lot of other groups worked to raise money. To raise money, sometimes these groups, they sponsored dances or other events. Some of these events would be deemed outright offensive to audiences today, but the Scotia Fire Department performed a minstrel show all over the county. It was super popular, and they donated 100% of the proceeds to the Red Cross. So while we might not enjoy it today, at least I guess their heart was in the right place. Other local fundraisers targeted other needs of our boys overseas, including fundraising drives to gather funds to provide tobacco to our troops. Ever gone smoke hungry? But bonds. So here's where we really get into these great posters I was telling you about. Humboldt residents did an awesome job of supporting the Red Cross and all of its missions and drives, but they really went above and beyond, over the top, I guess we should say, when it comes to supporting all of these Liberty Loan drives. There were a total of 4 Liberty Loan drives, 4 Liberty Bond drives during the course of the war, and then one that came after the war. So it was really, pushed heavily. We had famous actors and actresses, Charlie Chaplin and Mary Dressler, and all of the big names of the day were helping the government to go out on these bond drives and drive up participation in them. Mary Dressler came here to Humboldt County The amount that Humboldt County hoped to reach for the 4 Liberty Bond drives exceeded $3 million. The actual amount raised was almost twice that, at over $5.7 million. So we did really, really well, dollar-wise. There's the 3rd Liberty loan. I love this one. Are you 100% American? Prove it. And here's our 4th Liberty loan. Some of the, remember Belgium? Almost no one else does. And then, this is probably my favorite of the posters here. It's just gorgeous art. The final, there was the one last drive for Humboldt held after the war. They called this one the Victory Loan Drive. And along with it, they sent a train. Actually, there were several of these trains, and they went all over the country. And we had one over here in California that toured all of our little towns along the railroad. And the train carried trophies on it. It had a German plane. It had an artillery piece on it, and it had an American M1917 tank that all the newspapers called a British Whippet, but it wasn't. The trophy train was met in Eureka by a parade, and it met with fanfare pretty much everywhere it went. I think I got a picture of it in Scotia here. There it is in Scotia. But they had a parade for it in Eureka, and they took the tank down off the train and they drove it around in this empty lot behind the train depot. And they tried to go through a little creek that was there and got it hopelessly stuck. So they had to get the Eureka City road roller. And apparently the operator's name was Dick Decker. And so Dick Decker brought the road roller out, and they yanked that tank out of there and probably shamefacedly put it back on the tank. Proceeded to sell Liberty loans, I guess. The final loan drive was just as successful as all of the others. Oh, here's the tank. Sorry about that. Just as successful as all the others had been. It pulled in $1,686,950 and went over the quota by nearly $500,000. Oh, there's Dick Decker's road roller. Got to catch up on myself here. Getting carried away. There's our Victory Liberty loan. Sure, we'll finish the job. So it wasn't all about cash or even socks or tobacco, though. Some Humboldt County citizens were sincerely worried about our boys on the front lines getting enough to eat. One gentleman, Hans Hansen of Eureka, made a rather unique proposal to members of the Eureka City Council. He tried to speak at the council meeting, but he was pretty much shunted to the side, and so he had to kind of hover by the door and accost the members one at a time. And he suggested that they should, here's our hungry boys on the front line, that they should kill all the bears in the Sequoia Park Zoo and send that bear meat to our boys in the trenches, arguing that bear meat was very nutritious and high in fat. He also went on to suggest that when they ran out of, you know what, it made me think, wow, how many bears did they have in the zoo back then? Because wow, there's a lot of boys on the front lines. He suggested, though, that after they ran out of bears in the zoo, that he could take a group of men to the Klamath area where the bears were thick as trees, he says. He had a plan C also, apparently. He thought that when we killed all the bears in Northern California, we could hire Japanese whalers to come over and harvest whales off of our coast and send the whale meat to the boys overseas. So Mr. Hansen had some interesting ideas, I guess. I don't think anyone supported him, though. He did get in the paper. Humboldt County's efforts and sacrifices didn't go unrecognized by the rest of the state, at least not in the newspapers. One article from the San Francisco Examiner, a reporter wrote about the Queen City of Humboldt and about Humboldt County's people, our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents. And he said, and I quote, "These people of the mountains and the redwoods are a warlike lot, and they are financing and they are fighting 100%. Hoorah," right? So those who did not contribute enough to the war effort or were too poor to give money, too often earned the scorn of their community, particularly if they were too vocal in their frustration with the seemingly never-ending stream of donation requests and bond drives. Gus Richter of Riedel had lived in the county for many years. Just a few years before this, he had purchased the Riedel Hotel, one of the only truly historic buildings in Riedel, I think. And he had refurbished and reopened it. And everyone thought that was great. But then the war came along and Richter was awfully German. And he refused to buy bonds during the third Liberty loan when the bond solicitor came to his home. The bond solicitor reported him to the police and apparently to the angry mob in Scotia, who came to Richter's home and dragged him out and forced him to buy two $50 bonds. He was then arrested for his disloyal sentiments, and he was ordered by Judge Falk to contribute $300 to the Red Cross and buy $3,000 in Liberty bonds. Whew. No fewer than 6 people in our county were tarred and feathered for not buying Liberty bonds. In one case, at Hammond's Sawmill in Samoa, the offender was tarred and sawdusted before being run off the premises with a fire hose. Those who did not contribute were branded with the era's worst insult, slacker. A slacker would be someone who did not do their part or live up to expectations in some way. Mostly during the war, however, and the flu years, a slacker was someone who did not support the war or didn't wear a mask. It could range from a person who didn't purchase a bond to a draft dodger or someone violating the mask ordinance. Scotia, here's some more slackers for you before I move on to Scotia. Don't be a slacker, get to work, right? More propaganda posters trying to engineer that better society for us. Here we go. Your old records, well, those are slacker records because they didn't enlist with you, I guess. And remember, don't marry a slacker, girls. And don't forget this one too. Wear your masks or you'll be a slacker. Scotia made a parade float. It said, smoke out slackers, encouraging people to ferret out their less giving neighbors and report them. Yeah. Here's how you could report them. This shows up in the newspaper, right? You just fill it out, no problem. And it's anonymous. Slackers were not the only ones who were victims of this sort of aggressive patriotism. A wave of anti-German sentiment was crashing across the country, and our county was not immune to its effects. Here's a cartoon from Newspaper of the Day. This guy's mad because his wife bought a gift that said "Made in Germany" on it. A rash of unreasonable violence against German people descended on our nation, rolled across our country like a disease. Families literally were pulled out of their beds in the middle of the night, dragged into the streets and made to kiss the American flag because they were of German heritage. We've got a cartoon here. Here you've got the one that says camouflage there. You got a German guy. He's waving the flag out the window, but behind the blinds, he's drinking his German beer and sticking with his thing. And the next one shows Uncle Sam is going to lynch the Kaiser. So it's kind of sort of giving tacit permission that this mob violence is happening in the country. There was a group called the Knights of Liberty who were taking responsibility for these acts of violence. They wore white robes and white hoods, and they attacked you in the middle of the night and concealed their identity. I think it's hard to miss the irony of a group like this, very much like the Ku Klux Klan, attacking German people. The Knights of Liberty terrorized people all across the nation during this time, and their acts of intolerance were mimicked in our own county in the communities of Blue Lake, Corbell, Scotia, Larrabee, Eureka, and Samoa, and elsewhere. Constitutional rights, here's your white cappers right here, they call them. The Knights of Liberty being one group, the Klan being another group of white cappers. Constitutional rights, such as the freedom of speech, were essentially suspended by the Espionage and Sedition Acts during the war. In Humboldt, many who were considered enemy aliens by nature of their heritage were the victims of assault and discrimination at the hands of their co-workers, fellow community members, and law enforcement. Many were jailed and forced to pay fines as well as make contributions to the war effort. All who were of German or Austrian descent were forced to give up their firearms, register with law enforcement, and were forbidden from going closer than 100 yards from the waterfront, which denied a lot of these people access to some of the better jobs that were happening at that time. Probably the most publicized, if not the most egregious, local affront to justice was the so-called disloyalty case of Ferndale dairy rancher Chris Ammer. Ammer was a naturalized citizen of German descent who in November of 1917 was arrested for allegedly cursing the flag and the President of the United States. This was in his home, I believe. In March of 1918, Ammer was indicted for violation of the Espionage Act. He was the first man from Humboldt to be prosecuted for treason. Ammer was sentenced to McNeil Island for 5 years, the federal penitentiary. His sentence, thankfully, was ultimately commuted by President Wilson after the war. Ammer ultimately served less than a year, but after living in Ferndale for 35 years, Ammer lost his farm and the home he'd raised his family in, and he died in Germany in 1937, penniless. It was his own wife and daughter who had turned him in and were the chief witnesses for the prosecution. While many people here at home were interpreting their patriotic duties in their own ways, not everyone was dressing like the KKK or reporting their spouses to the authorities. Many people were doing what they could to contribute to the war in a positive way. And the war brought new opportunities for industry to our county. Socks were not the only things made in Humboldt to help with the war. The Rolfe brothers, including James Rolfe, the mayor of San Francisco, purchased the old Ben Dixon shipyard at Fairhaven. I got a few pictures of this place here. In anticipation of the need for wooden ships. The government announced the need for 1,000 wooden ships, and Eureka was soon bustling with shipbuilding activity. Seizing the same opportunity, the Hammond Lumber Company also joined the shipbuilding business and constructed a shipyard of its own in Samoa. Rolfe ran an all-union shop, something which did not make local timber barons very happy, especially Hammond, who was very much opposed to unions and who was in direct competition with Rolfe. Rolfe built 10 ships to Hammond's 7, however, despite Hammond apparently colluding with other timber companies in the area to deny Rolfe access to timber. He had to buy all of his from Oregon. Shipbuilding wasn't the only industry that saw a boost during the war. Here in Humboldt County, the Woolen Mills experienced a wartime boom as well. And here they are. Some of us remember those. Agriculture also flourished, but was plagued by labor shortages, brought about in part by the higher paying positions available in the shipyards. At one point, though, 200 boys and girls from local schools helped out, volunteering to help with planting during the war years. I'd like to ask you all to take a minute to remember, think about the many young men who left to fight in this war to end all wars and who came home with scars they carried for the rest of their lives. This, by the way, is the Armistice Day parade in Scotia at the end of the war, after the end of the war. Boys like Carson Ricks of Eureka sacrificed his left arm in an attempt to save some soldiers. He was an ambulance driver during the Verdun offensive. Boys like Ewing Peters of Wichipec, who on many occasions risked his own life to eliminate enemy snipers on battlefields in Flanders and in the Argonne. And men like Colonel Monroe, who gave his life to train and lead men in conflicts abroad. Let's remember and take pride in the fact that our country's involvement in World War I saved countless lives and shortened the length of the war by who knows how long. But let's also remember the mistakes that were made and maybe learn from them. More importantly, I'd like to ask you all to take just a moment to think about the boys who went halfway around the world to fight for our country and never came home, and the sacrifice that they made. 66 Humboldt County men gave up their lives fighting for this war. Let's remember these sons of Humboldt who sacrificed everything to fight in a war on the other side of the world. Let's remember they gave up their chance to become fathers and grandfathers to protect people they never met. Since World War I ended in November of 1918, the US has sent troops to many more conflicts abroad, and many more of our boys have made the ultimate sacrifice for this nation. And I think we should remember them and also remember what they fought for. They fought for us. I would like to leave with a few words spoken by General Omar Bradley on Armistice Day of 1948, after the Second World War. And Bradley reminded his audience of the lessons of the two wars. The first, he said, was that non-involvement in peace means certain involvement in war. And secondly, that armed forces can wage wars, but they cannot make peace. There's a wide chasm between war and peace that can only be bridged by goodwill, discussion, compromise, and agreement. Thank you. See if I can get this show off there.
Oh, that was great.
Okay, I can't find you guys now, but I'm sure you're on here somewhere. Okay.
There might be some questions.
Well, I'm glad to take some questions. I can't seem to find anybody on this thing anymore. I've lost my buttons for you. So holler them out and I'll be glad to answer them.
If anyone has any questions they'd like to put in the chat, you can go ahead and type your questions.
Someone might have to read them to me as I've lost my, I can no longer see the Zoom. I don't know that I'm savvy enough to get it back here.
Down at the bottom, there should be a stop sharing, or up at the top of your screen.
Well, I hid all those little buttons. So let's see here.
So Jim, we have one question in the chat. Where was the Empire Theater in Eureka?
Oh, geez, that's a really good question. The Empire Theater. I don't know exactly. I could look in my notes, but I don't happen to have them on me. So you got me on that one. First one right out the gate is a zinger. You win. You get like a point for that, right? Hey, there it is. Okay, somebody figured out how to bring it back. Thank you for that. Were there any other questions that I possibly cannot answer?
We have in the chat from Jody, it's not a question, but Colonel Tom was a close friend of her grandfather. She believes they were both part of the same group of local World War I vets.
Yeah, yeah, that's actually, and he was a past Historical Society president, Catherine Mace's grandfather as well. That guy was in a lot of war.
We have a question from Cindy. Where were the Woolen Mills?
They were on Broadway, and those weren't torn down until 85, I think. And in fact, it's a really sad story because they were actually on the Registry of Historic Places, and we were all fighting very hard to stop that from getting torn down, but on Broadway there. I think right about where, I think there's a cell phone place or something there right now. Jessie knows. She could tell us for sure.
Jessie, it looks like you're muted. If you want to go ahead and unmute, we'll be able to hear you. There we go.
I remember them very clearly, but I can't tell you exactly where they were. My grandfather had sheep, and there were, in Bridgeville, everybody had sheep when I grew up. It was before cattle. And so the Woolen Mill was a big deal.
Yeah, it was a huge deal. Sheep was a big part of our county's economy for years and years, kind of in waves, but there was a time when it was really big. I saw another question pop up. I can't see them all, or I would jump all over it, but it asked where they shipped out from. They went from here to Mare Island, and from Mare Island, they shipped out.
Yep.
We have another question. Where was the Eureka main train depot?
The main train depot. Jesse, do you know what the address of that was too? It was clear down at the end of the Old Town district, basically, kind of near, kind of at the end of the balloon track there, right? Yeah.
My uncle used to take me, he was a World War I vet. He used to take me down there to mail letters just so that I could see the trains come in.
Yeah.
I mean, I was really little. I was on his shoulders.
Right. Yeah, I saw another question pop up about Native American participation in World War I from our area. And just as in World War II, yeah, we had a lot of Native American guys who were right there. And I mentioned Ewing Peters of Wichipec. I'm pretty sure he was a Native American gentleman. So they were in there. They fully participated. The tribal groups around us have been very patriotic through every war we've had, to my understanding. I see a whole bunch more things in the chat, but I don't have it up. Let me see if I can read any more.
We have a comment from Jody that not all were shipped overseas. Her grandfather was sent to the base in Washington State.
Yeah, that's very true. And also another thing that's important to remember and very sad is a lot of people who reported for duty and were recruited for this effort didn't make it to the front lines because, you know, there's no surer way in that time period to super spread this flu than to start enlisting soldiers from all over the United States and housing them in the same place. So it was a super spreader event like you couldn't believe, and it resulted in a lot of casualties from the flu. Very sad. So a lot of people didn't go overseas because they didn't make it out of, they weren't healthy enough to go. Local recruits in a tank division, I'm sure there were. And in fact, I think I did run across one newspaper article that talks about somebody who's either he or his brother was in a tank division. The tank divisions were very popular. Tanks were kind of this new thing that people were very excited about. Airplanes as well. It's the kind of subject that, you know, there's so much that was going on in this time period to try to encapsulate really an entire decade in an even, 45-minute or hour-long presentation. I can skip off the high points, but there's a lot of depth here. And if people were interested in finding out more, there's a great deal more. And there's a great deal more that I found that I just didn't feel like it was perfect for this presentation. So if you're interested in learning more about this, you should contact the Historical Society. They've got some fantastic resources there, and they need your support as well. So don't forget the Historical Society. There was one thing that I wanted to put in here. I'll share it with you guys, even though I can't show it to you. There was a lot of pressure for people to contribute to these loan drives. I mean, people were being tarred and feathered. If that's not pressure, then I don't know what is. But we have at the Historical Society, and part of our collection, we have a letter. So the loan drives were all handled on a local level by a committee. And so these committee people were selected by someone, and, let's be frank, they were usually the kind of movers and shakers of the community. They were the cream of the crop, right? They were the ones deciding. And not just in Humboldt County, but in communities all over the United States, these committees that appointed themselves essentially would decide what level of contribution their friends, neighbors, and peers, or whoever, should be involved in, and they would send them a bill. We're having a fundraiser. Here's yours, and we're not talking about small bills. We're talking about thousands and thousands of dollars here. So yeah, quite an event. We really underappreciate all of the nuance of World War I. It gets lost in the shuffle.
We have a question about a photo of a patrol on Samoa, and they're wondering if that was World War I, World War II, or both.
It was likely World War II. I don't know of any patrolling of Samoa because really the war was so far away. The Germans weren't really, there was no one in the Pacific to worry about. So there are a lot of amazing, wonderful pictures of the shore patrol that was going on in Samoa, horseback and whatever. If you go to the Maritime Museum, wow, they have an amazing collection for this. So that's another resource for you guys if you're looking into more information on this event or the H3 or the Milwaukee or any of this stuff. Hit the Clark, hit the Maritime Museum, hit up the Historical Society, has an amazing trove of this stuff. So there's stuff out there. It's super exciting. If you're looking to donate stuff, I see this next question. If you have a couple of World War I books, you can drop them off at the Historical Society. Give them a call there. You can make arrangements for when a good time to drop them off so that someone could actually get them. Right now, I understand, Renee, you're on kind of a restricted hours there or no hours. So you definitely want to leave a message and someone could get back to you and arrange for that donation. Are there any other questions? Looks like, I guess not.
All right, I'm not seeing any other questions either. So Jim, thank you so much for this event. This was a really fascinating topic, and it sounds like there's so much more to continue learning about. So thank you for sharing that with us. And thank you to the Humboldt County Historical Society for partnering with the library on this. If anybody would like to watch the recording, it should be up on our YouTube channel within the next week. And we will see you all next month if you'd like to join us on the 11th for the next lecture. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.